My name's Teddy Stahl. This is my co-host, Aiden Hewlett, for the only installment of this podcast ever.
My name is Aiden Hewlett. It's my co-host, Teddy Stahl.
I'm going to be interviewing Aiden about his thoughts on the 2019 South Korean film Parasite.
Best Picture winner.
Best Picture winner. It swept the Oscars in
There you go.
2019 before COVID, and then everyone saw it after the Oscars because they didn't have anything else to do.
I saw it before the Oscars, actually. I was one of the first watchers.
How many times had you seen Parasite before this interview?
Well, I watched it. Let's do a tally on my fingers here. I watched it once for the class, I watched it once in theaters, and I own the Criterion release DVD. Shout out Criterion. So probably seen that about 3 or 4 times. And then I also remember watching it once with my friends, just off of some streaming service. Can't remember which one. So I'd guess a good 6, 7 times.
Was this the first film you had seen from the director Bong Joon-ho or South Korean cinema in general?
No, I had seen Okja, I believe it's called. And I can't remember if I watched The Host before or after. But I know since then I've watched... Oh, man, what is it called? The snow one. It has...
Snowpiercer?
Yeah, Snowpiercer. Yeah, that one.
So 2 other Bong Joon-ho films?
4 in total, including Parasite.
Okay. How do those films compare and contrast to Parasite as a general overview?
Well, the actor who plays the father in Parasite, I forget his name, but he's in a number of them. In terms of quality, I would argue Parasite is the best one. I like Okja as well a lot. Same with The Host. But Parasite to me is just the most well-rounded. It has the most to offer in terms of, no need to mention the themes of class. Well, there is a need to mention them because they're great. But Parasite to me, just in terms of rewatchability and just picking up new things every single time you watch it, and just the many layer. It's a very complex screenplay. And yeah, every single time I've watched it, I've picked up on new things and found more and more to enjoy.
Bong Joon-ho's films have a running theme of depicting what Bong himself has called the monstrous. This can apply to moments, characters, or societies. What would you say is the monstrous element of this film?
Yeah, I'd say there's a number of them, and that goes back to the main thing I love about this, which is the complexity of the story, and just how many a common thread I've noticed in the movie is you can apply definitions to different things. For example, Parasite, you can say the family is the parasite, the park, or it's the Kim family, correct? Yeah, the Kim family. You can say either of those are the parasite. You can say the man living downstairs is the parasite. But going back to your question in terms of the monster aspect, any number of them could be the monster. The man downstairs is the obvious one with his crazy monstrous eyes. That shot where he's creeping up the stairs while the boy eats the cake it really terrified me the first time I saw it and unsettles me in each and every rewatch. But the monster, that same thing could be applied to the Park family, particularly the father. There are a number of things he does that are very monstrous, particularly his comments about the smell of Mr. Kim. And the house itself has a very monstrous feeling to it. It's got a very unsettling layout, and I'm sure that's heightened by the things that occur inside of it. But something about that house, man, it's very... I love when houses are used as characters themselves.
What takeaways did you have from this film about South Korea and Western society as a whole?
Yeah, I think the question of class, which is the central aspect of this film and a lot of Bong Joon-ho's films, it's very potent today, and this movie could have been made 50 years ago and it would have been just as relevant back then. I'm going to go out on a limb and say it could be made 50 years from now and it'll be just as relevant 50 years from now. And so I think that it is, even though this is a movie made by a South Korean director, made with all South Korean actors, made in South Korea, it plays to the reality that we live in America and the reality that people live in essentially everywhere in the world. So I love films that are both timeless and borderless in the way that they apply to anyone, everywhere, at any point in time. And I think this movie it's one of the rare movies that's able to do that, because I really can't think of too many that are this all encompassing.
Bong Joon-ho's previous films took place in various locations. According to an interview that Bong Joon-ho did with David Sims of The Atlantic in 2019, Bong said he asked himself while making the film, "What story could I tell with just two houses?" Do you think this small-scale setting was beneficial or detrimental to the overall world building in this film?
I mean, that's the entire movie, isn't it? The houses. I feel like it's integral. Not only is it, not detrimental, it's integral to the quality of this movie. Small scale sets and environments in film are very interesting, and they need to be very intentional. In my the way that I read it, theater and those performances play very well into small scale, one or two set type environments, and that's why a lot of these movies that are scaled down in that regard read almost like plays.
You might be interested to know that Bong Joon-ho admitted that this film was originally meant to be a play, and that's why it had a small setting.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. But yeah, I mean, plays. I have a theater background. I like plays a lot. I've seen a lot of plays, and there's a big difference between theater and film in a lot of ways. But also, there's a lot of similarities. And when you reduce film down to the the restrictions that the theater has in terms of scale, it forces you to operate. Obviously, it forces you to operate within those boundaries, and that's something that this film does very well. And it limits itself, which in turn allows itself to blossom. By confiding in these two homes, it's able to more intricately explore the smaller crevices of these houses by literally going down through the crevices of the house and using these places to explore the themes of class that I touched on.
One could draw a comparison between the isolation of the upper-class home and the lack of privacy in the lower-class home. Would you feel this comparison is accurate to the story?
Yeah, I think that windows are a big part of this movie. And I think it's cool how the Park House has ginormous windows while the Kim House has smaller windows, which you would think, I mean, bigger windows means easier visibility. But no, it's quite the opposite. The only people you ever see through the windows of the Park House are the Park children. And you see countless, people urinating in the streets, driving by on motorcycles, just walking around, freely able to look into the windows of the Kim family at any moment. Yeah, just briefly touching on this, I love the way that windows are used in this movie and the way that the window borders and panes are. There's a couple smart little shots where they divide a line between the rich and the poor, literally, and I really like that.
On a different note, would you say this film is more akin to the classical Shakespearean comedy or the classical Shakespearean tragedy, or even both, and why?
I mean, in terms of Shakespeare, the only two Shakespeare plays that I've ever read in not for my leisure in high school, I read Romeo and Juliet and Macbeth. I think those are both tragedies, if I'm remembering correctly. I can't really comment on its relation to Shakespearean comedies, but I mean, it definitely feels very Shakespearean in its tragic ending. The Kims, they lead their own demise, whether it's at their fault or not. He is the one who kills Mr. Park, and it's just it's a very Shakespearean ending, very grandiose, very.
Yeah, it's not like I would say that it's not a complete tragedy in that one of the classic elements. I've read a handful of Shakespeare plays. One of the classic elements of the tragedy is that the work is named after a character. For example, like Lear, Romeo and Juliet, Macbeth, Hamlet. It's a rule of thumb with Shakespeare that if the play is named after a character, it's a tragedy.
Yeah.
I would say that it's definitely both. The first half, it lends itself very well to the comedy, and the second half to the tragedy aspect of it, of the tragedy of all that effort, the climb out of the lower class being taken away.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, and I wrote down here that both Shakespeare's comedies and tragedies are based off of simple miscommunication and misunderstanding. In Romeo and Juliet, Juliet fails to communicate to Paris that she doesn't love him at the beginning of the play, and that sets a lot of the events of the play into motion.
Ugh, yeah.
Leads Paris on. Tybalt catches wind of this, and it just scales out from there. And then in The Taming of the Shrew, the character Petruchio enters a relationship with Kate to earn money. He misunderstands the relationship that he has with Kate, and he assumes that he's tamed her. This leads to a lot of hijinks. But to quote Bong himself in that same Atlantic interview that I mentioned earlier, the audience is the one who knows more, and the characters have a difficult time communicating with each other. With that in mind, would you say that Parasite is both a tragedy and a comedy in that it's based off miscommunication?
Spoiler alert for the Shakespeare plays, by the way. But yeah, I would. I would say that again, I can't really, I don't know too much about comedies, but the way that you described it, that definitely sounds like it's, based in Shakespeare. But yeah, I would agree with that. I would agree with that sentiment.
You're somebody that makes films yourself. As a filmmaker, if you could extract any specific category of this film, be it world building or acting, and achieve something of the same scale in your own work, what would it be?
That's a really good question. Yeah, I mean, like I said before, I think the most impressive thing to me about this film is just the complexity in its I'd just say the complexity in its script. I think it like I said, every time you come back to it, it feels like it has more to give you. The themes are very on the nose and yet subtle, which is incredible. The themes of class. It's a movie about two separate families of separate classes. Like, that's quite on the nose, but at the same time, there's so many subtle and nuanced differences. It took me almost more than a half dozen watches to pick up on a couple things before I was like, oh wow, that is saying that. And yeah, so for me it'd probably be that. I also man, I mean, the acting is incredible, the direction is incredible, everything about it. Something very, very, very specific. I'd say the sound design is beautiful in this movie. I think the way that sound is used and repetition in sounds and just very fast, there's a lot of triplets in sounds in this movie, and to me triplets is almost kind of a theme here. I think that is a more specific, less broad thing that I very much envy about this filmmaking.
Final takeaway for this film. In our own conversations outside of this podcast, you've told me before that it can be hard to talk about Parasite because it's been, to quote you, talked to death.
Mm-hmm.
Why do you think that is?
Because it's, almost a perfect movie. There's really nothing about this movie that's like, wow, that's a glaring hole. And there are certain movies, that come along. I think of Pulp Fiction. That's another one that I'd put into that category of, it's so great and there are so many perfect things about it that really, it's just been talked to death, because you watch it and it's pretty evident that it's like, it's an airtight. I'm using airtight to replace the word perfect here because I don't want to call a movie perfect, but it's an airtight movie. Because of that, it's been talked to death because so many people are able to view it and appreciate how golden of a movie it is and how once in a lifetime it is. And so, yeah, I don't mean that as a discredit to its ability. I mean that as quite the opposite. I think it's a beautifully, 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 perfectly well-made movie.
Yeah, I would say that, building off that the one of the other reasons why it's so talked about is because of how relatable it is to the majority of people in the Western world and places the most heavily impacted by imperialism, especially a place like South Korea where the U.S. has like dozens of military bases.
Mm-hmm.
That's about it. I'm Teddy Stahl, and I just interviewed Aiden Hewlett about Parasite. Thank you for your time, Aiden.
That was a wild cutoff. Yeah, thank you.